to be covering Genesis chapters 25 and 26. Last week in chapters 23 and 24, Sarah died and Abraham buried her in a cave, and then in chapter 24, he had one of his servants go back and get a wife for Isaac, who turns out to be Rebekah, who's also his second cousin. Chapter 25, the death of Abraham. After Sarah died, Abraham remarried, and he went on to have 6 more sons. And then, while he was alive, he gave his sons gifts and stuff, and he sent them away from Isaac, who was his son from his dead wife Sarah. Abraham was 175 years old when he died, and he left everything that he owned to his son Isaac. And then he was buried in the cave with his first wife Sarah, and then God blessed Isaac. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born, and later on, he grows up, and Sarah dies, and he remarries, like I just said. He has 6 more sons. He is over 100 years old and having 6 new babies. I just think that's kind of funny. He's having new children, and he's over 100 years old. It's just ridiculous. The next story of chapter 25 of Genesis is called Ishmael's Sons. If you remember back in Genesis chapter 16, Abraham, who was then called Abram, his wife Sarah, who was then called Sarai, brought him one of her servants, Hagar, and he got her pregnant, and they had Ishmael. Later, in chapter 21, he sent Ishmael and Hagar away. He sent them off into the desert, and I guess he was done with them. But Ishmael went on to have 12 sons, and each of his 12 sons were tribal leaders for where they settled, their camps and their settlements and stuff. Ishmael lived 137 years, and he and his sons, they all settled near Egypt. And the last thing that it says in this story is that Ishmael's sons all lived in hostility towards their brothers. It doesn't say why or how or what anything. It just says that they lived in hostility towards each other. Now, if you're familiar at all with the Quran, Islam, and all of that, then you know the connection that Ishmael has to that whole religion. It's kind of the start for that, but we're not really going to get into that right now. The last story of chapter 25 is Jacob and Esau. Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, and Rebekah was barren, just like his mother Sarah was barren, and so Isaac prayed to God for his wife, and he healed her, and then she got pregnant with twins. I guess this is the first time that anybody's ever gotten pregnant with twins, because Rebekah has no clue what's going on. She calls on God, and she's like, why is this happening to me? What the fuck is going on? Genesis chapter 25, verse 23, the Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples from within you will be separated. 1 people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. First of all, I just have to laugh at how ridiculous the grammar is there. It sucks, and it's funny. If you know anything about English and grammar, that whole sentence, the whole verse, it was just butchered. It was awful. Anyway, God says, basically, you have 2 babies, and they're gonna be separated, and one's gonna be better than the other. So, Rebekah has her twins, and big surprise, they're both boys. The first one comes out, and he's red and hairy, and so they name him Esau. And then the second one comes out holding on to his brother's heel, his foot, I guess, and they name him Jacob. They grow up, and Esau becomes a skillful hunter, and he, roams around the land and hunts food. And Jacob, he's more of a quiet man, and he stays by his tents and at home. It says that Isaac loves Esau, but Rebekah loves Jacob. So I guess they can't both love both of their children. One has to love one, and one has to love the other for some reason. I don't know. I, for one, love both of my boys, and my husband loves both of them equally. So this is stupid to me. I don't like that. So one day, Jacob's cooking some stew, and his brother Esau comes in. He had been hunting, and he's famished. And he says, quick, give me some stew. I'm famished. And Jacob's like, well, first, sell me your birthright. Esau says, look, I'm about to die. What good is my birthright to you? And Jacob, he insists that Esau sells him his birthright. So finally he does, and Jacob gives him some food, and Esau eats the food and he drinks, and then he gets up and leaves. And the last thing that it says in that chapter is that he despises his birthright. I think it's kind of funny, though, that Esau sells his birthright just for some stew. Like, I'm sure he wasn't actually dying. He was just probably really hungry. But he sells his birthright, so now Jacob is going to get everything when Isaac dies. Chapter 26, Isaac and Abimelech. Now there was a famine in the land, besides the earlier famine of Abraham's time. And Isaac went to Abimelech, king of the Philistines in Gerar. The Lord appeared to Isaac and said, "Do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you and will bless you. For you and your descendants will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and will give them all these lands. And through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me, and kept my requirements, my commands, my decrees, and my laws." So Isaac stayed in Gerar. If you've been watching my videos, or you read your Bible, or have read your Bible, you might remember back when Abraham went to Egypt, and he lied to the Pharaoh and said that Sarah was his sister. And then he did the same thing again later to Abimelech. And then it turned out that he wasn't even lying, that Sarah was actually his sister, but that's a whole nother thing that doesn't pertain to this. Isaac does the same thing here to Abimelech again. Isaac tells them, when they ask about his wife, he tells them she's his sister. And she's not his sister. She's actually his cousin, but whatever. She's not his sister. Isaac is really following in his father's footsteps. He's telling the exact same lie that his father told, and to Abimelech. So again, it's the same person that they're lying to. And they'd already done this. Like, he should know by this point that Abimelech isn't gonna do anything to them. Like, they don't care. They just want them to be honest. But no, he's going to lie and say, "This is my sister," even though she's his wife / cousin. So Isaac and Rebekah, they're there for a while, and Abimelech looks out his window and he sees Rebekah being caressed by Isaac, I guess in the street. So they clearly weren't trying to hide the fact that they were married very well, because if Abimelech can just look out of his window and see you caressing your wife, you're probably not in a very private place, and you probably shouldn't be caressing your wife. Abimelech summons Isaac, and he calls him out on his bullshit. He's like, "She's not your sister. I saw you. She's really your wife. Like, why did you tell this lie?" Isaac said he was afraid that he would lose his life on account of her. And Abimelech's like, "Dude, if one of us would have slept with her, you would have brought guilt on us. Like, what the fuck are you thinking, man? Come on." So then Abimelech turns around and he tells his people, "Anybody who molests this man or his wife will surely be put to death." Again, Isaac is blessed by God, and he becomes rich, and he just keeps becoming richer until he's wealthy, and he's got like a whole bunch of shit that everybody else doesn't have. The Philistines envied Isaac for his wealth, and they decided to quit digging the wells that they had started building or digging for Abraham before he died. They quit digging them because they were jealous, and they filled them back up with earth. Then Abimelech comes to Isaac, and he's like, "Hey, you have too much money, and you're too wealthy, and it's intimidating, so get the fuck out." So Isaac leaves, and he goes to the valley of Gerar. And he reopens the wells, and he has his servants like digging the wells back up. And they're digging one, and they find fresh water. And the people who live there in that land, like the herdsmen, they come in and they're like, "That's our water." And they quarrel over it. And so Isaac's servants dig another well, and then they quarrel over that well too. So they build a third well, and nobody quarrels over it. And that's that. There's just another well. I don't know what the fascination with wells is in this story. It's just wells are important to have, I guess, for some reason. I don't have a well. Maybe I should go out in the backyard and dig a well until I find some water. Then Isaac goes to Beersheba, and God's like, "Don't be afraid. I'm with you. I've blessed you. I am going to increase your descendants for your father Abraham." So Isaac builds an altar, and he calls on God, and he pitches a tent, and guess what? They dig another well in Beersheba. Meanwhile, Abimelech comes to where Isaac is, to Beersheba, And Isaac's like, what do you want? You know, you weren't very nice to me, you told me to leave. Abimelech says, more or less, you're a righteous man, you know, you're right with God and such. I just want to make a treaty with you so that you don't do anything to me or my people. More or less what he did with his father, with Abraham, and the treaty that they had, he wants to do that with his son, with Isaac, too. So Isaac makes a feast for them, and they eat, and then the next morning they sign a treaty, and Abimelech and his men, they go on their way. Later that day, Isaac's servants come to him and they say, we found some fresh water, and that's it. Just a random fun fact. Hey, they found fresh water. At the end of this story of chapter 26, it goes back to Esau for a second, and it just says that Esau was 40 years old when he married his 2 wives, and they were a source of grief to his parents, to Isaac and Rebekah, and that's where that ends. So it doesn't explain why or how they're a source of grief, just like it didn't explain why or how Ishmael's sons were all hostile towards each other. They just were, and they were just a source of grief. They just suck, I guess. Chapter 26 was just scattered. It was just ridiculous. It was all over the place. Nothing really made much sense to me. Like, I don't understand why Isaac lied about his wife to begin with. I don't understand why him being wealthy was a threat to Abimelech. Though, on the other hand, I have way more respect for Abimelech than I do for Isaac or Abraham or anybody else, really. Like, so far, Abimelech is the only person in the Bible that I've actually liked. And that's because he's, like, honest. He's like, hey, I'm not gonna fuck your wife if you just tell me she's your wife, damn it. Like, Jesus Christ, come on. It's common sense. It's not like he has no morals. Plus, the same thing happened with Isaac's dad, with Abraham. He already covered this. There was no reason for Isaac to do it again. It's stupid. I'm on page 15 of Genesis, and we have already dealt with the same scenario 3 times. This is the 3rd time. You know, first with the Pharaoh in Egypt, then Abraham with Abimelech, and now Isaac with Abimelech. So how many times are they going to tell the same lie before it gets old? If you like my video, like it and share it. If you haven't already, subscribe to my channel. Next week, I think we're going to continue on with Jacob. So we kind of have an idea of how he is. You know, he made his brother sell him his birthright, or he wasn't going to let him eat. So I feel like Jacob's going to get into a few shenanigans, maybe. I don't know, because I haven't read ahead, so we'll see. I really think that the writers of the Bible could have been a little bit more creative here. They have no originality, and the story is just kind of repeating itself, so hopefully it gets better.